here. Can everybody see Pope Francis on the screen? Okay, perfect. So I basically was asked to talk a little bit about Pope Francis' lessons as we talk about the idea of recovering mission in the United States. So just a little bit of background, Don and I were colleagues from the Catholic Leadership Institute, so we've known each other for quite some time now. And we had an interesting conversation, and a little while ago I was on the phone with him and Sister Nancy, and we talked about this. And so I put together a little 15-minute kind of talk on this topic. So I'll cover a few things. The first is the two problems and the three tensions that we see in the world today, as well as the four principles that at the time Bergoglio and now Pope Francis talks about as to how to manage those two problems and three tensions. What that means when you're talking about recovering the identity of the Christian citizen, and then what the implications are for mission in America. Now, the two problems that Bergoglio had identified in the past was the primacy of the individual, and you can find this in his 2010 bicentennial address to the people of Argentina, where he talks about the hegemony of individualism, people putting themselves over and against the common good. And then he borrowed from Benedict XVI, where in Aparecida in 2007, he referred to the declension of the Christian citizen. And basically what he was saying is that we've lost Christian influence on culture because the Christian citizen went from being an active participant and producer of culture to being a passive recipient of it. So we saw a corruption of culture because the Christian citizen was no longer positively influencing culture. If we look at the three tensions that he talks about, and this is again in his bicentennial address in 2010, you will see all of these things he says actually threatens the stability of un pueblo, a people, that unity that you see, which would naturally be oriented to a common good. And it's also found in extreme forms when you have something like the dominance of the primacy of the individual, right? So fullness and limit, he refers to fullness being that desire to acquire or have or possess everything, and then limits being those barriers to actually doing that. So it could be in the terms of food scarcity, it could be in terms of time, it could be whatever attracts a person to go towards it in a way that we perceive will make us freer, right? Idea and reality, again, you see that tension there as people have conversations about what is, and what is the truth. There is a tension there and a temptation to relativize the truth in today's world. So he refers to this tension between ideas and reality. He also, in a way, takes a stab at Marx, Marx's materialism and Hegel's ideal, kind of like the idealism of the dominance of ideas over matter. And then there's the globalization and localization tension. And I think we can see this most commonly in, if you look at the tension between the local and the global church. And I apologize for the fire engines. I live off of US 1, so we may occasionally have the intrusive noise there. So those are the three tensions in society. So, the two problems being the primacy of the individual and the decline of Christian influence on culture, and then the three tensions here, fullness and limit, idea and reality, and global and local. Bergoglio actually kind of made a brilliant move when he talked about the tensions between the global and the local churches. So I'm going to start from the bottom up, actually, where he talks about the tension between the whole and the parts as using an image of a polyhedron, right? So if you look at the universal church, for example, that would be the shape of the polyhedron, right? And that, in principle, is a union of all the biases of each particular kind of member, right? What you find is that if a Christian citizen enters into a community, what he tries to reassure them of in regards to the tension between global and local levels is that they don't actually lose their identity, but they retain that. And they also, like everyone else that is in unity there help to make the shape hold, the whole shape hold of the church. So when he refers to the principle, the whole is greater than the parts, he says, it's more important to be united as a whole body than to simply give primacy to one part, if that makes sense. The principle of reality being greater than ideas, and again, he says that there has to be a dialogue between reality and an explanation. The ideas are developed or induced where reality simply is, right? And we have, as Catholics and as Christians, something that informs us about reality. So we have our scripture, our tradition, we have grace, we have that grace encounter with Jesus Christ, and that all informs us about the reality of the world and the cosmos. And then the ideas that are developed or induced to capture some part of that reality are what need to also be in constant dialogue with it. It also makes clear that it really is not possible to relativize the truth if you're using this principle, right? The top two here, time and space, time being greater than space and unity being greater than conflict, is really in reference to the tension between fullness and limits. And so one of the things he talks about is that time starts a process, whether it's a process of dialogue or a process of work, and space crystallizes it. And he refers, again, Argentina has its own history of corruption of certain things, like privileging space over and against the time needed to produce a process of dialogue. So one of the things he calls as a social sin is when you privilege spaces of power over processing times, you don't allow people to do that, and space is no longer at the service of those processes, then that becomes a social sin. So like the corner office or the penthouse suite where people can't necessarily access that space. So he says you need to privilege time over space. Unity and conflict, again, he says we have to aim towards unity, but you can't do that unless you actually address the conflict. In other words, you can't avoid, ignore, or be trapped in the conflict. You actually have to enter into it, suffer it, and resolve it in order for you to transition into a more constructive and positive process where you can actually reach a point of unity. So hopefully that makes a certain amount of sense as regards to the four principles managing those three tensions and the two problems. Now, the problem of the primacy of the individual, that individualism, what Bergoglio had mentioned was that those three tensions really eat away at community, at the people, the notion of unity. And so if you can manage those three tensions with these four principles, he says you can also weaken that hegemony of individualism and bring people back towards an orientation of a common good. As regards to the second problem, he also talks about the importance of recovering the identity of the Christian citizen. And, you know, his key, one of the things I learned about Bergoglio as I was studying his homilies in Argentina and looking at his addresses is that he comes up with these really interesting phrases that I haven't seen before. It's like kind of specific to him. And one is la mirada de fe, the gaze of faith. And I think he borrows from Augustine, actually, Augustine's theology in many ways. I had written a paper about that in an ethics and politics class. And he says that that's actually really important in order to enable a theological reimagination of the city. So la mirada de fe is the outcome of a personal encounter with Christ, right? The gaze of the Christian citizen. And in many ways, that enables a person to see reality for what it is. That citizen must also belong to un pueblo, which is natural when you have a personal encounter with Jesus, because Jesus builds that community for us, to have a more complete social identity. If you have la mirada de fe and an identity as a member of un pueblo, that would destroy the hegemony of individualism, essentially, right? It may also help reseed and re-ferment culture. And the way that happens is you go back into play, the notion of play with social, collective, and structural dimensions of community life. That means that in some way you have to encourage the communities that you're in to be comfortable with the idea that certain things, certain structural dimensions of community life might need to be rearranged or adapted to the emerging needs of that community in the 21st century. when you can get it back into that sense of play with these social, collective, and structural dimensions of community life, it will also enable everyone to kind of get on the same page about what is a common good, right? How do we build a common good, that sum total of conditions whereby human beings can flourish, and it's not just a few, but everyone can flourish, right? Bergoglio also talked about the attitudes, the three attitudes of the Christian gazer. And then as Pope Francis, he also has again and again referred to these three attitudes that the Christian gazer must have in the world in order to A, reduce the primacy of the individual, and B, start to influence culture again and help us get closer to orienting ourselves to a common good, right? So leaving ourselves to meet others in closeness with attitudes of proximity, there's two types of encounters that he talks about. One is the kind between God and person, human being, and that only happens with God's grace and initiative. God pursues the individual from within, right? So you talk about Augustine's kind of quote in the Confessions, "You were with me, but I was not with you. You called and shouted and broke through my deafness. You flared, blazed, banished my blindness. You lavished your fragrance. I gasped, and now I pant for you. You touched me, and I burned for your peace." That would be an example of God and human being encounter where God is initiating that moment of grace. The second kind is between the graced individual and the neighbor. And there's an effect that occurs in that encounter as well, especially if there is a joyful witness that accompanies that. It energizes the other people around them. It also speeds up very positive processes. I've actually seen this in action. So I can definitely say that there is some truth to that. And he says, you know, the gaze improves every time we practice the word. The word also being logos. You know, we practice what we are reading in scripture. We practice what we know of Christ in scripture. Contemplations then improves with action. So it cannot just be contemplation, there must be action there. So faith wants to see and to gaze and to serve and love and not necessarily rule over. That faith also and that gaze also limits the greed of the domineering eye. That's what he says in regards to that Christian gazer. And then every time one gazes with a desire to serve, then that person better targets his or her own beloved object, and that would be Jesus Christ in the flesh, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges in our modern world today, even with us being on Zoom and having maybe a little more time to ourselves because we're not commuting here, there, and everywhere, is learning to accompany other people in patience and accompanying those processes without necessarily damaging them. So you can do violence to a process if you're not patient with it, right? And so these three attitudes, according to Pope Francis, are really key in terms of how the Christian gazer is meant to transform the world. So last thing is just in terms of looking at mission in America. This is also borrowed from Bergoglio and later Pope Francis, that it's really important for us to reconnect with what is specifically Christian without being so syncretistic. And what I mean by that is you can't just mush everything together in what we have right now in culture, because a lot of that is an accumulation of other things that aren't Christian. So you need to actually reconnect with what is truly specifically Christian, and then dialogue with the culture that has a pagan, hybrid, pluralistic nature and is brewing now. Insofar as you can root yourself in that Christian identity and dialogue then beyond yourself to the fringes of our society, this is where you can start fermenting modern culture and becoming a producer of culture again. And, you know, again, resisting the temptation to relativize the truth, that's actually a really important warning that he had given us in 2010, and even in his homilies as Bishop of Buenos Aires. And part of that is because there is a hegemony of political correctness in the United States, in the public square, right? Where you're going to be pressured to relativize the truth insofar as you're not going to offend somebody who doesn't agree with you on that. And the reason why he's saying you have to resist that temptation to relativize the truth, because what is reality? You know, you have to start facing that question, what is reality without God? If reality simply is, then these ideas about the truth, that may or may not necessarily describe reality, they need to be confronted in dialogue, right? So these are some of just the lessons in regards to how Bergoglio's principles, particularly when he looks at the two problems and the three principles, the two problems and three tensions and the four principles, like how that could translate into a sense of mission in America. And we see a lot of different pockets of culture and tension that could be managed in this way. So that's everything that I had.
She was talking. Was there something that really resonated with you? Was there something that kind of challenged you a bit? Just share that with your other colleagues. Now, thank you for your patience. This is the first time I'm going to be doing the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will be assigned automatically. Cabrini and I will not be in a breakout room. So you have just a handful of minutes, 5 minutes, just to share with each other. Give a second to just say who you are and where you're from, but then focus on what Cabrini said. What resonated with you? What challenged you? And then we'll come back in about 5 to 6 minutes, okay? I'm going to give them a 30-second warning. So, all right. So, how was that? Okay? Yeah, okay. Here we go. Closing all rooms. Asking everybody to come back.
How does that work?
There's just a button at the bottom of the Zoom thing, and it says breakout rooms. And you can assign people randomly, or you can actually assign people to individual breakout rooms. So for my first time around, I just had them assigned. So we'll see how it went. One of the things that we were talking about, Cabrini, just as they're coming back, is the relationship between truth as a solid reality, and then of course we have some of the priests are stepping forward, and in the name of truth, they're telling people that you can't vote for one particular party or another. And so it's kind of, how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile what Francis is saying with what some folks are doing currently? So
that's good. That's a good question.
Yeah, that was what we were wrestling with. Well, folks are coming back. Thank you very much. Just want to mention that you can always put something in the chat function. You can. So one of the things I'd like to hear is, how was that breakout session for you? And I'm going to. We have 51 participants. You can unmute yourself. And if there's anything that you would like to just share, we'll have 3 to 5 observations. How was that conversation?
It was too short. Right.
Yeah, I knew it was a tease, Antoinette. It was a tease. Hopefully, want more. Yeah, good but too short. Okay, a lot of people are feeling that way.
Right.
Any substance that came out of that conversation? Any surprises?
We had a question about one of the 4 principles that was hard to understand, that time is greater than space.
Great. Okay, Cabrini, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, sure. So when he talks about that, it's really in his own context when he was in Argentina, where he saw, for example, people sectioning off privileged spaces that prohibited people from gathering in a way that was more organic and conducive to developing a process of dialogue. An analog here in the United States would be how certain parts of a building are privileged and cordoned off and not accessible to others in order to engage in dialogue, right? So if you segregate the elite from the people that aren't considered the elite, by space. You're not actually allowing them to engage in dialogue together over a period of time. So what he means by, time starts a process and space crystallizes it is he's like, don't start by privileging space and segregating people based on what you consider to be their status as elite or not elite. Instead, put the space at the service of the people and give them those places, those little pockets to have that dialogue. When I was working at Deloitte, one of the things that I remember is that they were trying to do away with something called a closed door policy and try to make it an open door policy so that our supervisors would be more accessible to us. Previously, if you looked at the corporate culture in the big four firms, right? A lot of the executives and the managing directors had offices and the rest of us had cube farms, right? And if the office doors were closed, it did not encourage a positive dialogue, not only between the people that they were supervising, but also between departments and divisions. And so they instituted something called an open door policy, which then allowed for more interaction, allowed for more processes to occur over time in such a way that those spaces then became at the service of the people. I don't know if that helps, but that's his context, essentially.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Another question that was raised in the chat was their group wondered about the difference between mission in America versus mission from America. So you have folks that are from America going out to other places around the world in mission, and then there's the question of mission in America. Any thoughts about that, Cabrina?
If I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, I was wondering if maybe I could get a little bit more elaboration on how you would like me to answer that. Maybe?
Yeah, I think if I can just speak to the question, some of us are very, very focused on the foreign missions or a global mission.
Right.
And the service that we see that we're doing to the local church is to help the local church literally to help the local church be Catholic. So the foreign missions reminds us that we are connected to people all over the world from a wide variety of cultures. Well, so there does tend to be an emphasis then on a whole variety of different spaces, if you will. And that then, of course, is going to be distinct from, a concern about how the culture here in the United States is being evangelized and transformed and that. So I don't know, it seems like one of those, maybe it's the tension between the global and the local that you addressed a little bit.
I guess if you maybe change the perspective a little bit and looking at the Christian citizen, regardless of where they are in the world, whether they're doing it as Americans or as people coming to other places, if you take the perspective of the Christian citizen, right, the call is the same. It's to encounter the other beyond yourself, right? So even if, for example, I'm a second generation Korean, right? Korean American. So my first language wasn't English, but I was raised in this public school system and then partially in a Catholic school system. So I have an understanding of American culture, but it's not like somebody who was a fourth or fifth generation immigrant, right? My perspective as somebody who is in mission here in the United States is not necessarily as an American to Americans, but is simply as a Christian pilgrim to others. And that may actually simplify it a little bit, because even in the United States, there are so many pockets of subcultures that you will inevitably find yourself on the outside of those tribal lines. So I learned that when I was on field assignment for the Oblates of the Virgin Mary, and I went to their different locations. Like Hawaiian Gardens has a very rich Latinx and Vietnamese and Filipino community, right? But they're on the crosshairs between two gangs. They're on the borders between two gangs. And so there's a lot of violence in that area. And at the same time, there's also a lot of different cultural communities that have learned to live together. Some of them in segregation from one another, right? If you go to Alton, Illinois, which is another place that they serve, it's almost entirely nth generation Germans who have a totally different culture than what you see in Hawaiian Gardens, right? And I've never lived in either of those places, and yet I had to conduct interviews there and listen to them talk about their faith lives and their relationship with these priests and brothers. So if I approach it as a Christian citizen, as a Christian pilgrim walking along the way, then it kind of doesn't matter whether I'm in America or going on mission from America, if that makes sense. I don't know if that helps, but that's okay. Okay.
Yeah. Well, Cabrini, thank you very much. There's a number of other great insights. But let's go back to the breakout rooms one more time. And again, this is going to be a random assignment of the breakout rooms. I promise you, Antoinette, we're going to give you a little bit more time. We're going to give you all of 10 minutes. I know that's not much. But I just want to try and stretch us just a little bit by trying to wrestle with the question, kind of based on this perspective, that we are called to a citizenship, building on that gaze of Jesus as our Savior, and called to be a citizen in service to a people. If we hear that and we begin to appropriate that, what does that ask of us? Or as Nancy likes to say, what is ours to do? So we're going to give you 10 minutes for that, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and hope this is a little bit more time. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Cabrini, as part of the experience that some of the folks here might be having is finding themselves in multiple contexts, right? Now, it's true, all of us are in multiple contexts all the time, right? I live in a family, I have a work context, so we're all in multiple contexts. But it's a little different in mission, right? Because I'm thinking of Elizabeth, who's on the screen here. I haven't heard her yet, but, so she's in the Diocese of La Crosse. They also do, a mission trip. They're in a kind of a relationship with one of the dioceses in Kenya. So that is another context for them, right? And so, how do you inhabit one context? I'm sorry, I said La Crosse, I meant to say St. Cloud. How do you inhabit one context, St. Cloud, and how do you inhabit another context and all the people that are involved in that, in a different diocese on the other side of the world? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead and try and answer that now, or are there more people still coming on, or?
Yeah, let's just give it another second or so. I'll just repeat it.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. I hope that was a little bit longer. I was just sharing with Cabrini, again, this question of global, local, that kind of attention. All of us live in multiple contexts. We live in our home, we live in our neighborhood, we live in a work environment. So we live in multiple contexts. When it becomes mission, it becomes a little different, right? So I was thinking of Elizabeth at the Diocese of St. Cloud. So she's in that diocesan context and is concerned about the Church of St. Cloud, but they're also in a relationship, a covenant relationship with a diocese in Kenya. And so there's that relationship and that context, especially when they travel to that context and create those relationships. So there is this kind of bifurcation, if you will, that happens. And so I was just wondering if Cabrini would want to comment on that. And then we'll open it up for a few more comments before we bring this part of our membership meeting to a close.
Okay. I can speak to it as a religion and culture scholar who's kind of done field work in multiple contexts and maybe provide some insights in the context of Christian mission. So when I was kind of traveling all over the country to study these different communities, I spent a lot of time researching those local cultures, try to understand what was their meeting making system, what were their symbols, what was their sense of community. Some of them used different languages, and I can speak a little bit of Spanish, so I was able to, pick up on the dialogue there a little bit. So a lot of work has to happen prior to actually entering into a new context. That's the first part, is just to do the research and understand their meaning-making system. How do they make meaning of the world, right? Which might be different from place to place. The other thing that I found critical to really being accepted and trusted was to find a friendly native. And what I mean by finding a friendly native is if you're entering in to a community that may have a clear line of insider, outsider kind of a status, the best people that will help bring an outsider in is the person that can stand on that line as a member of that in-group and pull in the outsider. So I encountered some groups with a very strong sense of tribalism, and what ended up happening is there were a couple of friendly natives who already knew who I was and had interacted with me and pulled me in. And so the trust was built very quickly. It happened much more quickly than if I didn't have what you would call a friendly native, right? The last thing is, we're all Catholics in this environment, or we're all Christians in where I was going at least. So where I could find commonalities in the things that unite us, and again, this is where unity over conflict, unity is greater than conflict, where I can find those bits of language and culture that united us, I was able to highlight and bring forth as, hey, I believe this too. I understand this of you. I remember in Hawaiian Gardens, they had a very strong connection with the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, and my spirituality is also Ignatian. So I spoke in that language. That's a coded language, right? So, in as much as you can find something that unifies all of us, whether you're the outsider kind of coming in, or whether you're a group of people that are meeting another group of people who have a different system, as long as you've done the work, you have a friendly native. The last part, which I think is really important, is finding those elements that unite you as a people, right? So I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, it's very much so. I want to open the conversation up for a few minutes here. Other thoughts, comments? Again, the question was, what is ours to do? How was that conversation? Any insights that you'd care to share with the group?
I guess I could say something. I think one of the things that's ours to do is to actually cross those boundaries. Like Cabrini talked about going around different places, but we're talking about the world, and it used to be from the United States to other countries, and we do that. So we cross a boundary. But America is a nation of immigrants, and we've already our forebears, and we have already crossed. So, and we're having a lot of hard times with that, with the issues of racism and all. But we are trying to grapple with it here, and that's something we have to do. We do it internally within the U.S., and we go to other cultures to intentionally engage, and we change and come back and share that. And now, like with Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers, we invite people from other cultures to join us, so they are now inside. So the outside inside becomes different. It's not, we are one. We are actually one. And in Jesus' eyes, the eyes of Christ, we are. And now so our task is to help that happen in the world, really,
Great. Thank you, Russ. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, one person once commented to my grandfather. He says, I notice you guys don't talk very much at the dinner table. And he says, it's because the food is really good. So I think, Cabrini, you have given us quite a bit to digest. And we're very, very grateful for your time and for your stimulating thoughts. So
well, thanks for having me.
yeah, thank you very much. So we're going to now shift our
I'll go ahead and pop out then, if that's okay.
Absolutely,
It
yeah.
was great to meet you all. Thank you so much for having me, and hope you have a blessed rest of your meeting.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks
Thank
very much.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Cabrini. Okay.
Well, good afternoon once again, everybody. And I just want to add my words too, that Cabrini did give us so much to think about, and some leads that I think are very concrete and we can really do. I am grateful, all of you, our faithful members of the U.S. Catholic Mission Association, for your presence here. And it is truly a joy for me and a blessing to be able to meet with you during this membership meeting. I recognize a lot of your faces, and I remember conversations we had at the last conference, and it's good to see you back, and also all the new people. And as I was preparing for this report, I discovered that before long, I really wasn't writing a report, but I was writing a reflection. You will be hearing these reports, which are a vital part of our membership assembly, from Don, our executive director, on objectives, on planning and the finances with Bob. We're going to be hearing these, and I have actually nothing more to add to these reports because they are so well done and they're done by such competent people. But what I feel is essential to the life of any organization is contemplative time to reflect on what is our mission. What is the spirit that moves us to be members of the USCMA? And of course, what is ours to do? I also believe that I need not repeat here all the details of the challenges that we are facing because of these pandemic times. The past 6 months have changed all of us and our way of being in so many ways. We continue to pray for the many victims of COVID-19, and we grow more fearful as the winter season of another flu quickly approaches. The political and social arenas for us as Americans and for the world are the most difficult ones that I have ever known. Deep wounds and grave evils in our society have shown their faces again and again, especially with the senseless murders of so many people of color. That as they continue to occur, it is incomprehensible to our Christian hearts and minds. Our hearts also cry in solidarity with the people who have lost everything because of the natural disasters, from the terrible hurricanes in the east and the unstoppable fires in the west. But this is our world of today. This is the world that USCMA must give its response and reach out to be the presence of God's love as we live the mission entrusted to each one of us. Do you feel as overwhelmed as I do right now? Does the present reality seem to be beyond our capability to contribute with a meaningful response? I would like to seek my inspiration for these questions from one of Pope Francis's most recent talks. He gave it actually last Saturday on September 12th, when he met with 250 members of the Laudato Si communities who were meeting in Rome. Francis uses two very important words, which to me are in the hearts of every missionary that I have ever known, including in my own heart: contemplation and compassion. These words are intrinsically part of our mission. As we contemplate our reality, the pains and the struggles of all peoples, we grow in compassion and thus become co-creators of a new reality. Robin Gomez, who writes for the Vatican News, has summarized the Pope's words of his speech and has written, contemplation requires silence and prayer so that harmony which is a healthy balance between head, heart, and hands, or between thought, feeling, and action, returns to the soul. Those who contemplate discover the tenderness of God's gaze. We talked about attitudes of gazing today, and that each one is important in the eyes of God. Each one can transform a little world polluted by human veracity into the good reality willed by the Creator. Those who contemplate do not remain with their hands in their pockets, but instead find something tangible to do. I see each one of us and the USCMA as embracing contemplation as a way to fulfill our mission. Through silence and prayer, a harmony is restored within us, which does not allow us to simply lament the obvious wrongs while waiting for others to do something. Through contemplation, we discover the tenderness of God's gaze, God's love. We are then compelled, obligated to bring that love to others. That is our mission, not to remain with our hands in our pockets, but to do something tangible. We are compelled and strengthened by our own experience of God's love to embrace actions that seek transformation of our world as willed by the Creator. And the second word, compassion. The fruit of compassion, as Pope Francis says, the fruit of contemplation, as Pope Francis says, is compassion. We become compassionate when we see with the eyes of God and regard others as sisters and brothers of a single family living in the same house. God's compassion is the opposite of our indifference, and it is the best vaccine against the epidemic of indifference. The Pope said the world needs this creative and active charity from people who do not stay in front of screens making comments, but who are willing to get their hands dirty to remove degradation and restore dignity. Having compassion is choosing not to have any enemies, but to see everyone as a neighbor. Boy, how hard is that today? Seeing everyone as neighbor can break the pandemic of indifference. And again, we ask ourselves, how can the USCMA contribute to the transformation of a reality so extreme in its challenges? One thing I do know is that we need all of you, each member, to join us, the National Board, the Executive Director, to develop actions that can make a difference. We cannot give excuses like the various persons who hurried past the beaten man who was robbed, but we must be like the Good Samaritan who bathed the beaten man, found him a place to recover, left money to sustain this recovery, and then promised to return to pay for anything that was needed. My mind and my heart are moved by the symbolism of each one of those gospel lines in that parable and what they could mean to us as members of the USCMA and as individuals. Let us call each other to collective action, not standing on the wayside with hands in our pockets, but with dirty hands, hands that smell of compassion and transformation. I thank you all deeply from my heart for being part of the USCMA. I ask God to bless all of you for giving your life to promote life and all of life. Thank you. God bless.
Nancy, thank you very much for those reflections. Clearly, we have kind of our challenges laid out for us. We'd like to ask Bishop James Schumann to share a few words. Bishop Schumann is the auxiliary bishop for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. and he has been the Episcopal advisor to the USCMA since March of last year. So Bishop Schumann, please.
Well, thank you. Again, my name is Bishop Jim Sherman, Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. I've been a priest of the Archdiocese for 34 years and bishop for 3 years. You know, mission has always been very near and dear to me. I was ordained in 1986, and my first parish assignment was in a changing neighborhood on the south side of Milwaukee. And the area was becoming more and more Hispanic at that time. And I began to learn Spanish and to learn a little bit more about another culture that was living side by side with my culture. And then my second assignment from 1992 to 1996 was a mission assignment. We have a sister parish in the Dominican Republic called La Sagrada Familia, or Holy Family Parish, located in the province of Asua in the Diocese of San Juan de la Maguana. And during those years, I learned a lot as a young priest. I learned a lot about poverty, cultural differences, and different ways of evangelization. Those, for me, were just very wonderful years as I served in sacramental ministry, leadership formation, and social outreach. I guess I really learned to love the people, and they taught me many lessons about hospitality and community and hope. When my mission assignment was done, I was called back to the Archdiocese to work in our seminary as spiritual director. But of course, I took my experiences with me into that role. I also part-time studied at Catholic Theological Union and worked on my Doctor of Ministry degree in the area of spirituality, but I focused on intercultural seminary formation because we were bringing in people from different cultures into the seminary at that time. And I worked a lot on intercultural communication issues. And then after my time in the seminary formation, I went back to parish ministry, and all of my parishes were multicultural assignments. As mentioned, there was a time when I got to meet with Don when he was visiting Milwaukee, and had the opportunity to talk about the USCMA. And sometime later, he asked me if I would consider being the Episcopal advisor, and in some way to help form a link between the USCMA and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I was very happy to accept, and I'm happy to be at your service. So thank you very much.
Bishop, thank you. We really appreciate you being with us and being for us. So thanks very much. Sister Nancy, is there anything else that you would like to address before we move on to the financial review?
I would just like to give my word of thanks personally to Bishop also. Thank you so much for saying yes, and we do appreciate so much your presence here, and we're looking forward to a wonderful relationship. And whenever any of you go to Milwaukee, go see him.
You're invited.
Yes, and I hope to be there maybe sometime next year, not this year.
Very good. Thank you very much. Before we do our just to remind people is that after our meeting, we send out a ballot survey, and that's where you have an opportunity to affirm the slate of candidates that's being presented to you from the Board of Directors. All right, so now I have to share a new screen and turn it over to our treasurer, Bob Eilenfeld. Bob, you want to walk us through our financial report?
Thanks, Don. Having done a few financial reports in my business days before I retired, it's a pleasure to report like this that is almost entirely positive. I've done more than a few that weren't that way, and it's great to have one that is. starting out with last year, we started a program called a dashboard that does a very concise way to review our financial things in one page. And at the bottom, it reports the level, the status and indicator, and there can be a red, that's bad. You're going to be gone before long if you stay red. There's yellow, that's not so good. There's green, which is good, and there's gold, which is wonderful. I'm pleased to report that UCSMA right now is green. It means we have 9 to 15 months reserve on hand, and that that's reflected in the dashboard. We also applied for and received $30,000 from the Paycheck Protection Program and $50,000 from the Catholic Mission Forum assets. So those are a good positive resource for us to draw on. I'm also pleased to announce that Don negotiated a new home for us in the Washington-Baltimore area, and it's part of the Conference of Major Superiors of Men, and we're getting a much more attractive rental rate there, plus other benefits as well. So that's going to help our finances as well, and we thank the Catholic Superior Conference of Major Superiors of Men for being willing to host us when we're there. The fifth column on the USMA Advisability Indicator talks about the revised dissolution fund, and we'll be discussing that more because with the new lease, that number will change, and we'll be talking about that at our December board meeting. We normally would have an annual audit because of the situation with the IRS and the pandemic. That audit will not take place until October 30th. Finally, we're talking about finding ways to give more value to our members, to encourage more membership and improve membership recruitment strategies and engage more Catholic foundations as financial partners. That's basically our financial report, and if you want to learn more details about it, it's available on the website. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Don.
Bob, thank you very much. Just a couple of things to underscore. Bob is, as our treasurer, he and I review the financial situations quarterly, and it's been just very, very helpful to us. So Bob, thank you very much for that work. Bob is also really encouraging the board to constantly look for ways to enhance the value of our membership. And part of that value comes from you. Again, as Nancy said, what is ours to do? The question is, as I looked at the history of USCMA, we started back in 1949. When the first missionaries came together in 1949, they seemed to want to do two things. They wanted to create a relationship with one another. There was about 32 mission sending communities that came together in Maryknoll in 1949. So they wanted to be in relationship with one another. What we would say today is they wanted to accompany each other. But then as a group, they also wanted to be in relationship with the bishops. So two different kinds of relationships with one another and with the larger church. And I think that continues. And so, Bob and I would welcome anyone who likes to do financial stuff to join us in our efforts, because obviously we need to look at other possible revenue streams to keep the association moving forward. So again, thank you very much, Bob. The other thing is that these reports, we have a membership meeting page on the website, and these reports are all on that web page for your use. I'm going to shift the screen again, and I want to share with you our membership report, just so you have a sense of kind of what we're dealing with now as we move forward. I'm trying to find my screen here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, find my screen, and then get back on here. We've had some changes in membership, and that's what I want to share with you now. So I'm going to share my screen at this point. Okay, so with the membership, you can see the 2019 and the 2020 members, and then you see the change column. There's been no change in our top members. We have two organizations that are very generous to us. We really appreciate their support, and that has not changed, and the same is true for Sustainer. There has been some change in the patron as well as the donor level, but then there's been losses on the lower end of the membership scale. We've lost a total of 55 members from 2019 to 2020. So we're obviously concerned about that. And then now when we talk about members here, what we're talking about is primarily we're talking about organizational members. A lot of these organizations, they have what's called affiliate members, and so we probably have over 500 affiliate members. But in terms of dues paying, these are the dues paying members, some individuals, mostly organizations. We did have a large group of associate members. It was actually Sister Nancy who shared with us a list of associate members, and they kind of bumped up our associate membership last year. But you know, people are in a pandemic, and so what we instituted was kind of a pandemic relief. In other words, we didn't cancel anyone's membership who was not able to pay for 2020. Everyone's struggling. We recognize that. We want to be for people and not make things more difficult for folks. So we've had a pandemic relief. And that's one of the reasons why we have to really look carefully at the whole question of membership. The structure of the membership is based actually on a giving hierarchy rather than services received. And so that's one of the questions that the board of directors has to look at, is how do we revive our membership structures. Obviously, once again, any members interested in working on this new membership structure is encouraged to contact me, because we're going to have to give some good long hard thought to it in terms of what it means to be an association dedicated to the mission of the church. So those are one of the other issues that we have to deal with. And then finally, and I know I'm mindful of the time here, finally we do have, I wanted to share with you our kind of our plan. The board met recently and came up with a plan. We call it the pandemic plan, actually, because we're just very mindful of the time that we're in. So I'm going to share this. We call it "We Are Still Here," and just 5 points, 6 points. So membership has done pretty well this year. Actually, even with the pandemic, we're at 83% of membership. Last year, we were at 104% of membership. So obviously, there's been some dip. We tried the Mission Alive program, and we had some traction with that, but we didn't take enough time to consult with all the diocesan directors, and so they had some concerns. So we had to address that. So we did try to do that, but the board decided that we wouldn't move forward because we didn't want to have any bad feelings. So we had to do work remotely. We've been back in the office since July, but when we move, we'll go back into remote working because we're moving into a hotspot, high infection rate in Prince George's County. And then lastly, we're working with the Pontifical Mission Society on a project called Missio Plus. we're trying to produce 10 30-minute programs that will really break open this experience that we're having here in the United States. All the things that Nancy talked about, you know, the pandemic, the racial tensions, the economy, the fires out west and the flooding down south, and the political campaign and all that's happening. What's that experience like, and what does mission have to say to that? So it's a very exciting project. Really very happy to be working with the good people at the Pontifical Mission Society. And, you know, this will kind of take the place of our conference, which we had to cancel, or not cancel, but postpone for a year because of the pandemic. And it will promote mission because it's designed for the adult Catholic. It will be broadcast on Wednesday night at 7:30, and we'll be getting information out to you within the next couple of days. Our hope is to have our first episode next Wednesday. So that's one of the projects that we're working on, and if you have any interest in it, please let me know. Just drop me an email because I need some help recruiting speakers for that. Okay.
May I suggest something?
Sure.
If you might want to send around that list of topics that you sent to the board, and then people would have a better idea if, you know, they would know somewhere, or they themselves would feel called to maybe do that.
Excellent idea. We'll be happy to do that. So thank you very much, Nancy. Okay, just finally, just so what you know what we're going to try and do over the next 6 months or so, we really want to focus on engagement. So we're going to be reaching out and trying to talk, engage each one of our members. We really want to involve members in any kind of new programming. So that's number 2. We are going to be inviting members to see if they could renew early to help us with our cash flow and those kind of questions. So that'll be going. Normally we renew in January. We'll send out the notices in December, November, December. We are writing grants. We have 2 major grant proposals out there. We're submitting another proposal tomorrow. So there are grants proposals out there so that we can advance the work of the association. And then lastly, the board is going to be working on a post-pandemic plan. This is what we're going to focus. This is kind of our focus until we can kind of begin to emerge out of the pandemic. And once we, but while we're having this focus, we're also going to be planning for a post-pandemic world, whenever that begins. So that's the way the board is trying to structure this. As always, the board is always open to your ideas, your feedback, your pushback. We want to hear from you. So if you have thoughts about this, or you're thinking, you know, this is not going to work at all, please let us know. We want to hear from you. So you're always invited to give us your thoughts. If you haven't seen this yet, treat yourself. The reason why we call this "We Are Still Here" is that we've been inspired by this little video that the Pontifical Mission Societies in Europe did, which just says, we are still here. We're going to continue to hang in there because we're missionaries. It's a very powerful, short 3-minute video, so I'd recommend it to you. We may be in this pandemic for another 6 months or another 16 months, but we are still here, and that's our plan for the future. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Sister Nancy for any closing thoughts, adjournment, and closing prayer.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to recognize the hard work that Don and Bob and all the board members, really, when we get together, everybody participates so well and really helps to deepen our understanding and our thoughts of how we think USCMA should be and how much we want to make a difference. I'd also like to remember and thank Nicole and Adiana, who I think is on, raise your hand, Adiana.
Ariana, yeah.
Yeah, there she is. She's our volunteer, and she's helping with note-taking, I think, huh? So thank you all in the staff for everything you do. They do all the work, and we are the beneficiaries of it. And so now I would like to officially close our membership meeting at this time. Thank you all once again.